this was my identity.
Nobody talks about how freaking hard it is to be a dentist. What most people talk about is how this affects the patient. What nobody talks about is how this affects us. Dentistry is ready for this. Now is really the time. Welcome to Wellness in Dentistry. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Kyle Stanley. I'm a dentist, a tech entrepreneur, speaker, and a researcher. And I'm joined by my very good friend and your co-host, Dr. Martin Mendelson. He is a disabled dentist, coach, speaker, thought leader, and author. And together we've helped thousands of dental professionals pursue wellness in dentistry. And if you haven't listened to our podcast before, we go all into different aspects of wellness in dentistry for the patient, for the practitioner, and for the practice. Everybody needs wellness, and this is what we talk about. And if you're interested in spending 2 days with us, because we're so darn fun, come on May 9th and 10th to Glidewell Dental Lab in Irvine, California, and join us for our Lightside Live program. You get 12 CE credits. It's our transformational 2-day course, all about wellness in dentistry, setting boundaries, expectation, communication, crucial conversations. So many breakthroughs happen at this, and we are just hoping that you can get there. Go to wellnessindentistry.com. You can find all of our links there and sign up today. So Martin, today we're going to talk about being consistent, being a leader, setting boundaries, and this is a challenging subject for many people. Why do you think that is?
I think it is. I mean, I've realized, particularly recently, which is why we're having this discussion here today, how often I've heard this with dentists. And we spend more time with our teams than we do with anybody else. And we want to have a good time while we're there, paging Captain Obvious. While at the same time, there are times where we have to be consistent. And what I've noticed is so many of our colleagues conflate the idea of, being consistent and holding people accountable to being a jerk. And so this came up with one of my coaching clients just the other day, last week. And we were talking about that this individual asked his team to do XYZ. And we were talking about the fact that he stated, he's like, well, I don't want to be a jerk about it and have them not like me. And my answer to that was, so let's take a step back. Let's pretend you're a little boy again and your parents asked you to do something. And then you didn't do it. And then they held you accountable to it. Maybe they even punished you. Would they be an asshole? Or would they be your parents holding you accountable?
Yeah, I just had this happen yesterday. And when I think about boundaries and setting expectations, first of all, I have to say I was the worst at them. So anybody listening, if you say, oh, this is so challenging for me, trust me, I was horrible at this. I'm way better now because I put time, money, and effort into it. But an example that I gave that I haven't told you about, Martin, is last night, my son came home. I don't even remember where we were. My son came home. Oh, he came home from a movie. I took him to a movie for his late celebration of his birthday. Nice. And with his friend, and it's a 90-minute movie, and then went to the arcade and whatever. He came home and he was begging and begging and begging for TV. And my wife said, no, we're not doing TV tonight. We're going to eat dinner, play with your sister. You can play with us, or you can help us with dinner, but we're not doing TV tonight. You've watched enough TV and you just went to a movie, right?
Yeah.
And he was just annoying, asking, well, can I have TV? Well, can I watch sports? Well, what if I did it on an iPad? What if I did it? And we said, Falco, no TV. And I said, Falco, you ask again for TV, you're not getting TV tomorrow. So that was me setting the boundary, right? Yeah. This is what may happen. Guess what happened?
He asked again, didn't he?
He asked for it. Yeah. He asked for it. And I said, okay, no TV tomorrow. And then he threw a fit, right?
Yep.
And I think that fit was him not getting TV, not me enforcing the boundary. He was mad about the result, right?
Yeah.
But today, when we came home, I was testing to see if he remembered. So I picked him up at school and I said, what are you going to do when we get home? And he
Thank
said,
you.
he said, well, I don't know, there's a book that, I may read, or maybe I'll play with his sister. And he knew.
Mm,
And what's funny is he said something, I don't remember what it was, but I said, do you know why you're not getting TV? And he said, yeah, I know why. So he wasn't mad. He was mad at the outcome, I think, because he's a child, but
sure.
he knew why it happened, I guess is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so I
Absolutely.
think with any kind of boundary, and I talk about this in my complication compliance method, which is about setting boundaries with fees associated with potential revisions or complications. The first thing is you have to define what it is.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't define what it is, if this doesn't become a policy, you can't enforce it, right? It's like
Correct.
you can't
Correct.
have a patient cancel last minute and then say, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, we're going to charge your card $100 because we have a cancellation fee." Like, I didn't know there was a cancellation fee.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you see this so many times as well when everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible.
Mm,
And so I see this also very often, because my body of work really focuses on communication, team alignment, team cohesion. But as you might imagine, all kinds of things come up as I'm coaching teams and doctors. So, I'm not a consultant sitting there helping you with your schedule, but what I'm about to say seems to come up a lot,
mhm.
where there is a scheduling template, supposedly, and it's violated, and then nobody knows, who did what, or no one wants to own up to it, even in situations where they have a practice management system that's sophisticated enough. Not that this is that sophisticated of an option, or of a function,
Teacher.
but yeah, but they know who made the damn appointment because you were
Right.
logged in.
Hmm.
So I see this all the time, and that's just one minor example. So the question becomes, okay, what are we going to do about it? And oftentimes, if it's that group thing, my typical advice to a leader is, great, then let's turn it back on the same people that are like, oh, and basically say, okay, so how are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again? What ideas do we have? We have a discussion, we land on an agreement, we document that agreement as is necessary in many cases. And then the last part of that, which is the most critical, is what's going to happen if this doesn't occur?
Mm,
And we talk about it as a group. And
hmm.
so most most team members will follow along, acquiesce, will agree to, because they understand that you're trying to make things better. But what we often also see is that there are team members, unfortunately, that aren't going to play nice in the sandbox. And so why are we letting those individuals dictate our lives and our reality and our greater levels of stress versus, playing to everybody else?
It reminds me of this quote that I saw recently that says something about setting stricter boundary, like be strict at the beginning. It's easier to become more lenient over time than it is to
Hmm.
become more strict over time.
Oh, 100%.
And that was a huge problem with me is that I, as a boss, wanted to be liked. Well, I'll just say I, as a person, wanted to be liked.
Sure, we all
So that
do.
meant me as a boss, I
Yeah,
wanted to be liked. Now, the older and older I get, the less I care about that, actually.
right.
The less I care about being liked. Of course, it's nice to meet someone and they like you, but I think once you have your priorities straight and your values straight, it's
Hmm.
easier to not be liked.
Yeah.
But I've seen this, and again, going back to parenting for everybody listening who's a parent, I have more boundaries with the kids than my wife does. So I'll give you
Hmm.
one example. I don't want the kids to eat in front of the TV, meaning like we have a TV with a carpet and a couch, right? So I don't want them eating on the couch. I don't want them eating on the carpet. They can eat in the dining room, which is next door. They can still see the TV,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
eat on the table, or
I'm
they
a
can
witness. I've been to your house. They can see
That's
it.
right. That's right. But for those people that haven't, but
Hmm.
they can even pull a chair over, but I don't want them on the carpet. I don't want them
Yeah, of
on the sofa.
course.
So that was our rule.
Hmm.
Now, eventually, not to throw my wife under the bus or anything, but eventually she said, well, you can eat on the carpet if it's like carrots or if
Okay.
you're eating almonds or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
yeah.
what do you think happened?
Oh, I know exactly what happened. I'm picturing grape jelly or something.
It's yogurt and a mango puree is what you should.
Bingo. Yes, yes, yes.
Basically, and I have to say it's hard to blame the kids on this
Sure.
because even though she may have said if you're eating carrots then it's okay to eat on it, they became
Yeah,
used to eating on the
yeah.
carpet. So
Hmm.
that now when they grab something else, they just instinctively go sit on the
Yeah,
carpet. And now I'm trying to work it back, but it's so much more challenging to go back to be more strict.
yeah.
It was so easy when that was all they knew. And I think we have to think about that with our teams and with our patients too. It's like, let's say you have a new practice. I would try to be fairly strict in your
Hmm.
boundaries and enforce them. And let's say it's 5 years out and these people have been with you and they've really become part of your team. And, and then something happens and you can be more lenient, right? But
Yeah.
the consistency, I think, is what's important in this.
Well, and the I actually just wrote kind of a white paper. I just looked up, I called it Building a High Performing Team Lessons from Google's Project Aristotle and the Power of Leadership Accountability. And I actually wrote this with a dental slant and a non-dental slant because I work with both parties. And something I've been saying more recently, particularly since the new year turned, is, we have to stop kidding ourselves and saying what it is we do is unique. And so, with great respect to what it is we do, when we're at our chairs and the patient's mouths are open, what we do is unique. Every single damn thing except for that is not. And so, I really beg people to take a look at Project Aristotle because it's very interesting. And so there were five key findings. Things like psychological safety is the foundation of team success. Dependability must be non-negotiable. Structure and clarity drive results. Meaningful work boosts engagement and impact. Team members need to see their contributions matter. And in many articles, the primary thing they talk about is outcome three, which is structure and clarity being critical. And I've seen in so many dental offices where this doesn't exist. And when I say structure and clarity, I'm talking about standard operating procedures, policies, closing and opening procedures, those kind of things. And people like that structure and clarity because if you put yourself in their shoes and it's like something comes up and you're like, oh, we supposed to do this? Well, not that you can account for every single thing in writing, let's get real. But 90% of the time you will be able to. And then not only are we more assured that it gets done, then there's a trail of accountability there. And then if something doesn't happen, well, that's when leadership accountability kicks in. And it's like, okay, what's going to be the consequence if something didn't happen, right? It's huge.
People like to know what they're expected to do.
Yeah.
It's like if you don't know what your goals are,
Yeah.
how do you know if you're doing well or not? And I
Correct.
think it's unfair for leaders to then harp on people if you didn't tell them how it's supposed to be. And I think it's the same way with patients. It's like
Yeah.
we assume patients know that we can't control if the implant integrates or not. We just
Yeah.
expect them to know. But if you don't tell them that,
Correct.
they don't know.
Correct.
Like something that even seems so silly, like we expect you to show up on time. You would
Hmm.
think everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
But if you say that and if you go over it, like let's say you're talking with a team member,
Hmm.
if you start at 8 a.m., they may think that if they're there at 8 a.m.,
Yeah.
then that's fine.
Yeah.
But you may think that starting at 8 a.m. means getting there at 7:45.
Yeah. I had this experience when I was a baby dentist, my first job, and I've thought about this a lot over the years, and part of it I don't know. But I don't ever recall seeing an employee manual of any type, and it was a larger practice. And I'll never forget, the owner of the practice came in one day and realized what was happening, which I'll describe in a second, and he really kind of lost it. And he was right and wrong all at the same time. So what was happening? The team was coming in, they were clocking in, and then they were eating breakfast.
Mm,
So basically, they were doing something that is something of their own time on the doctor's dime.
yeah.
So was that correct? No, absolutely not. And was he right to be upset? Absolutely. But honestly, I doubt there was anything ever discussed about whether that's acceptable or not. I really doubt it.
That's
Um,
the thing that I've learned in
yeah,
life ever since going through my burnout
yeah,
in dentistry that has applied so much to life is that if the expectation is not set,
yeah,
you can't, it's hard to blame the other person. I mean, like,
totally.
you see this in relationships all the time. It's like, oh, well, he doesn't do this or she doesn't do
Hmm.
this. And it's like, did you ever tell them that you want them to do that?
Hmm.
It's like, oh, my husband never,
Yeah,
whatever, pick something,
yeah,
cleans the bathroom.
yeah,
Did you tell him that you would like for him to clean the bathroom?
exactly.
Well, no, I haven't. Well, you can't expect anybody to read your mind, and that is your team, your patients, your kids, your dog, your spouse, your neighbor, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
like looking back on this, I've told you before, and I think it applies to this idea of boundaries and consistency. I
Hmm.
like dog training. I like getting a new
Hmm.
puppy and being I like having the best behaved dog at the dog park or at the beach. And I'll tell you, I've read a lot of books, I've watched a lot of videos. I feel like I'm pretty good at it. It's all consistency.
Hmm.
That's it.
That's all it
It's
is.
just never giving them an inch.
That's
Like
all it is.
you say, oh, well, let's let them on the bed just like one time. That's it.
No.
You lost it. You just lost it. Like we used to do this thing with my dog where she walks through the door last and she eats last. So it's like
Mm.
setting them up for,
Yeah.
letting them know that like they're part of our pack, but I'm first, the
Yeah.
kids are second,
Yeah.
third, basically.
Yeah.
And you have to be so consistent. In my opinion, that's why parenting is so hard. That's why
Hmm.
dog training is so hard. That's why
Yeah.
being a boss is so hard. That's why working with
Yeah.
patients and having team is
Yeah.
so hard because you have to be so consistent. But
Yeah.
that really is the secret.
Well, and I also want to say, I mean, plug, they're friends of the podcast. They're not financially supportive of this you know what I'm going to say? I see you smiling. But the folks at Ben Erickson, and there are other companies as well, but the folks at Ben Erickson I have a lot of experience with. They've been wonderful to my clients. They're an HR firm and they can write your whole manual for you. And they've done it for decades. And so it is very onerous. And, I used to also think, how is this even possible that you could do this? But if you work with entities like that, you can get this done. And then when newer things come up or things become nuanced or whatever, you can add it to an existing, shall we say, body of work that already exists versus trying to reinvent the wheel every time. And so working with somebody like Bent Erickson or somebody, that can do that with you and for you, is it expensive? Actually, I think what they charge is very reasonable. But here's the thing. How long would it take you to do this?
Yeah.
And so our time is incredibly valuable.
And
Obviously,
to add on that, I would say just having the policy isn't enough. The policy has to be communicated
oh, hell
and it has
yes.
to be reminded.
Oh, hell
And this is
yes.
the same with patients, this is the same with
Yeah.
teams, it's the same with
Yeah.
anybody
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
life.
Absolutely. And this goes back to the delegation framework in my online course, which there's it's kind of funny to me. I'm not surprised though. There's 5 parts to it, and the two most popular parts are crucial conversations and delegation.
Hmm.
Because basically the way I teach delegation, to give y'all a little hint, it's all about the communication. It's all about the setup. You have to set up the delegation process and give everybody permission to check in as part of the process so that when things don't go well and you say, how are things going? And they didn't do XYZ, you've already covered in the very beginning, and I'm paraphrasing a much longer discussion. Hey, I just want you to know when I ask you how things are going or I check in, it's as much about me making sure I communicated what needs to be done properly as it is you doing it properly. So from minute one, almost, you're setting up the idea that, oh, yeah, we're going to be talking about this and we're going to be making sure things are being done right. And it's a partnership, right?
Hmm.
And
This
so,
morning, this morning I told you, but I had my attachments removed. So for those that don't
yeah.
know, I had orthodontic surgery almost 2 years ago. So I've been an ortho for a little over 2 years. So it's a big day for me to get my attachments off. Now it's bleaching and a little bonding here and there,
Hmm.
both posterior and anterior. But so my partner, Matt Najad, was working on me with one of our assistants, and because it was me, he was telling her some stuff. So one of the things that she did was at one point she put he asked her for something. So she had the suction in my mouth and she turned to get that thing, what it was, and the suction moved and went in
Hmm.
his vision, right? And he
Hmm.
works through 8 or 10x loops. So like he's
Oh,
looking at
wow.
tiny, not a giant field of view. And he said, Look, listen, I'm going to tell you just because we're working it's Dr. Stanley here, but when I ask you to hand me something, I assume that either the suction's going to stay in the same place or you're going to stop suctioning. So it's
Mm,
okay to stop suctioning, but just know that I am looking at one tooth, and if
yeah.
you bump me or if anything happens, I can make mistakes.
Yeah.
So it's okay if you stop suctioning,
Yeah.
or if you can suction, stay in the same place. But if you think you can't, don't try to do it. And he said sometimes, because he works with two assistants many times, he
Hmm.
said sometimes I'll ask Brittany to get something, and you will turn to tell Brittany where it is or whatever it is, and your suction may move. And so
Mm,
it's a very small thing, right? But
yeah.
he's setting that expectation now, saying, "Hey, just
Yeah.
I'm not expecting you to do two things at once, but
Yes.
I'm expecting you to not make things worse or not bring up this potential problem, right? Where you could hit my handpiece or whatever."
Yeah.
And
And
I've talked about Matt many times before, is he's great at setting expectations,
yeah.
great at setting boundaries, and he's actually a great leader because of it.
Yeah. And I like what I keyed in on most was how he said, you can stop suctioning. That's totally cool.
Mhm.
So he was, to my ears, giving the assistant an option of how she wants to handle it based upon the scenario,
Yeah,
but understanding the consequences of her action. It's going back to Project Aristotle. We just talked about consequences.
it's
So,
true. Yeah, the consequence was my handpiece can move. I can hit the
yeah,
cheek. I can nick
yeah,
the tooth.
yeah. No, I
And
think,
what I liked too, how he said it, and I was listening as it was happening, was
mhm,
he was telling her from his point of view, and I'm talking about literally his point of view.
yeah.
Listen, through my loops, I'm looking at 1.5 teeth,
Hmm.
maybe.
Hmm.
So my field of view is small, and if your suction comes in, I may not be able to see anything.
Correct.
And so
Correct.
he's literally telling her from his point of view,
Yeah.
and so that she can better understand it because she may not know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm going back to that article that I wrote. It's meaningful work boosts engagement. So employees are more engaged when they see their work as meaningful. Tasks feel like busy work. Morale suffers. So you're connecting, quote, connecting daily tasks to the bigger mission of the organization, celebrate team wins and recognize individual contributions to reinforce purpose. So, as you just said, he wasn't just chastising, he wasn't just asking her to do it differently. He was giving her context around the why, which is
Yeah,
fantastic, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. I've always said this about Matt is that he's good at setting those boundaries. He's good at
Mhm.
having hard conversations, bringing
Yep.
them up instead of just letting them fester. And I think this is why you have so much resentment in dentistry with patients, with team, or even like with their spouses or with their
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
People love to just complain about somebody, but never tell them how they would like them to react.
Yeah. Yeah.
or respond or
Yeah. And
act.
I can see, or I can feel our listeners being like, well, like how do you handle it in the moment? You know? And I don't think everything needs to follow the framework of the crucial conversations necessarily. I think when it gets to a certain breaking point, that is important.
Yeah, the crucial
While
conversations I feel from what I've learned from you
Yeah,
is more of a planned conversation.
correct, correct.
Yeah,
And so, I think at the time, and I would be careful, of course, not to necessarily do it in front of a patient unless you have no choice.
true.
Sometimes we don't have a choice. That's
Yeah.
totally, we all know that. But, it'd be something like, hey, listen, I know we've gone over this before, or sorry, ooh, see, I'm human. So listen, I believe we've gone over this before. There seems to be a misunderstanding or a misalignment going on right now because my expectation was X and Y occurred. Let's make sure we make some time to make sure that we're both in agreement and understanding about what needs to be done. Now I'm paraphrasing it to kind of neutralize it or wash it out because I'm not using a specific example. But the point is that what was my intention in my words? My intention was that I want to communicate that from my perspective, I thought that we were good. Obviously, we're not good. Something's misaligned. Let's talk about how we can get back together in rowing in the same direction. Now, if this continues to happen, obviously that's another discussion, right? However, most of the time, not all, when we are consistent in this type of leadership, people will tend to follow suit because you know how it is. When we're not consistent, people have a mindset, either subconscious or conscious, where it's like, I know he said that, but he doesn't hold us to it.
Mm,
Right? So,
yeah.
what do you think about what I said?
Well,
Challenge
I
me. What
mean,
do you think?
again, I don't, I'm just like living in the parenting space with two little kids. If they think you're not going to enforce it, they're just going to keep doing it.
Totally.
And if they don't, I mean, with kids, it's harder. With adults, it's easier because they usually understand the consequences, usually, although
Usually.
I wouldn't assume that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I remember having this very intense discussion with my team many years ago. This
Hmm.
was when I was probably the lowest point of burnout. So, as you can imagine, I wasn't the best example of how it should be done. I was very
Sure.
emotional. I was very tired. I wasn't healthy. I was
Yeah.
very reactive. But someone ate my lunch,
Mm.
literally ate my lunch, like in the refrigerator. And I kind of freaked out. But to me, it seemed so crazy
Yeah.
to think that eating someone else's lunch would be okay.
It's so bizarre.
Now, however, knowing what I know now, the first thing is, did they know that it wasn't their lunch? I mean, okay, I think they did, but I'm thinking of the example that you and I talk about many times. The person cuts you off on the freeway and you go, gosh, what an
Yeah.
idiot. Did they actually see you? Is
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I think this person probably knew that, but it's so crazy to me that that would happen.
Yeah.
And it's like, should I have had to set that boundary of let's not eat each other's lunches? I ended up doing it because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I assumed that it was
Yeah.
so simple, but I
Yeah.
guess it wasn't.
Well, and it happens in a lot of different places in the world. One of the reels that makes me chuckle, and I hope it's not true, is somebody's so sick and tired of people eating their lunch, they put laxatives in it, and
Oh
so
my
or they
gosh.
put ghost pepper in it, and then
Oh
they can
my
figure out
gosh.
who keeps taking it. But that's a chronic thing, not like a one-off.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, in most cases, yeah, logic would say that the individual would absolutely know because it's in an individual style of bag
Right.
or mini lunch cooler thingy or whatever. And by the same token, we're in a dental practice with how many employees? How many did you have at the time? How many total
I
people?
had 7 at the
Right.
time,
So
plus 3
seven
doctors.
people. Yeah, like nobody that worked there was stupid. And
Hmm.
so, like, there's 7 people. Do you really think somebody thinks they're going to eat somebody's lunch and quote unquote get away with it when there's only 7 people there?
Yeah.
So, although logic would say to you, that's crazy, they had to have known, could it have also been something like they 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 realized it, but they realized it too late after they took a bite of the sandwich and then
Right.
were so embarrassed that they just like threw it away or ate the rest of it or whatever. And I'm not trying to make an excuse or come up with ridiculous examples to justify the behavior. I'm just throwing out the idea that we don't really know what happened, right? So,
Yeah. Another consistency thing that I was talking to, again, my partner Matt this morning, he was talking about a patient that was kind of a difficult patient. And Matt, again, he's fantastic about setting expectations with people, setting boundaries, telling them what the fees are going to be, telling them what's included, what's not included. One thing that Matt and I did many years ago is we created something. Well, actually, we changed something called a treatment agreement. So I got
mhm.
a treatment agreement, and I've actually made a course out of this called the treatment agreement. Um, I learned what a treatment agreement was when I was working with a prosthodontist at the Guide Institute.
Mhm.
And his name was Harrell Simon. He showed me this treatment agreement, and I was like,
Oh, I
"What is
know
that?"
her.
And he goes, "It's a treatment agreement." I go, "Oh, so it's a consent form." He goes, "No, this is a treatment agreement." And I'm like, "What's the difference?" And he said, this doesn't just talk about complications. This talks about how many appointments it's going to be, how long each appointment is going to be. It does talk about complications. It talks
Mhm.
about follow-up, how often I'm going to need to see you, what is
Mhm.
included, what is not included, what are the potential problems. I'm trying to think of everything else, what the treatment plan is, what their chief complaints were coming in, what was found
Mhm.
in the exams and in the radiographs and in the scans. So it's really like a all-encompassing expectation setting machine.
That's
And
cool.
he sits down with the patient and goes over everything. The patient signs it. One thing that Matt and I created and added to this was what is included, especially because Matt does a lot of cosmetics. Okay, so
Mhm.
you can imagine 90% of cases, easy, right? Mock-up, prep, bring it in, great.
Mhm.
But sometimes you do a mock-up, the patient doesn't like it.
Mhm.
So we
Sure.
redesign it. You do another mock-up. Oh, they like it a little better. But this lateral, I want this to be more
Yeah.
angled, and this canine's too sharp. And so he has it set in his treatment agreement that within the fee that he tells you, you get 2 mock-ups. Now
Mm.
you can do 100 mock-ups if you want, but
Yeah.
each one has a fee associated with it.
Totally.
And he was telling me about a case like this. And that is such great, in my opinion, leadership,
Mhm.
boundaries, consistency, and it sets the patient up for, no one's going to be mad. I mean, they may be mad, but it's not ridiculous, right? It's just like what you said
Yeah.
at the beginning. If they're mad, they can't think you're an asshole because
Mhm.
you set the expectation and they agreed to it.
And if they do get mad, talk about an employee situation, then you know what that tells you, don't you? And
Right.
so, and I feel compelled to say this at this juncture too, which is so much of the discourse on podcasts like this or social media is the challenging team member. But let's just acknowledge that they're the minority. Can we just do that for a minute? And why is that? Because human beings like to is the wrong word. Human beings often focus on the negative stuff. So you think about a dentist's reputation for pain provision or giving in the general public. It's like, oh, I don't like the dentist; they cause me pain. Well, how many movies is there a dentist where everybody loves them, right? You see what I mean? So it's like
I can't think of one.
exactly. So we got to remember and pull ourselves back and recognize that we got to be very careful not to only focus on the negative stuff because if we're not careful it'll take over and the positive stuff is just as valid as the negative stuff. I'll say that until they put me 6 feet under. And ask me why I'm so vigilant about this because I suffered for decades. I was the negative Nelly. I was the one with the negative talk track in my head. I was the one that was abusing substances because I was looking to numb the pain of my brain that just wouldn't shut up. And so I'm not some do-gooder that's better than anybody else, but I feel like I've been there and bought the damn t-shirt. And so please understand that it's a natural human inclination to look toward the negative. It takes work to look toward the positive. And I just want to acknowledge all those wonderful team members out there. And while we've been focusing on the challenges here today, and that's okay. But we need to recognize both sides.
It's the same thing with patients, if you think about
Yep,
that. I mean, we
totally
all have
true.
so many patients that we love, that show up on time, that pay their bills, that open
Totally.
wide, that, are just lovely to our team. And we do have those assholes that
Yeah,
are late and say bad things about us and
yeah,
complain about everything.
yeah.
And one thing I think that we really need consistency in, a topic, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is late fees.
Hmm.
Dentists are very much afraid of having late fees or
Yeah,
having, no-show fees, let's
yeah,
say. No-show fees is
yeah,
easier than a late fee, right? I don't think many people
yeah.
have. But I blame us
Oh yeah.
because
And
if you set an expectation, like let's say if someone's a new patient, they just had hygiene, they had a comprehensive exam, hygiene, and there was a crown that someone
Mhm.
found, right? So next appointment's going to be a crown, and they're making the appointment in the front.
Yeah.
I believe that the front office should set that expectation right
Oh
there.
yeah.
We've got you scheduled for March
Hmm.
1st,
Hmm.
and just as a reminder, we do have a fill in
Yep.
the blank hours or
Yep.
days late fee.
Yep.
And are if you're rescheduled or you cancel within that time, the fee
Hmm.
is X amount of dollars.
Yeah.
Now, many times people let the first one go, which I think is okay actually.
Yeah.
Um, but after that, they need to be reminded every time. So now we have text reminders, right? I mean, almost every practice has text
Hmm.
reminders. It should be in the text reminder
Hmm.
every time. So if you're sending a 2 week text reminder and then a 7 day and then a 3 day and then a 1 day
Yep.
or whatever it is, every single time it should remind them.
Hmm.
You're not
Yep.
trying, like, we don't make money on the $100, even $300 cancellation fee, right? We lose money on that.
Yeah.
But it's to get their behavior to a place where we want them to be so that we could treat them and do good work. But
Absolutely.
we have to set that expectation and we have to remind them.
So in full disclosure, I've had to deal with this recently in my coaching practice. And so, uh, whether it's coaching clients taking up an hour of my time or a patient taking up an hour of your time, time is time.
Yeah.
And, I've had since day one that I got my first certification, if you miss an appointment, with less than whatever, 24 hours notice, whatever it is, it's X dollars. And usually I'll let the first one go. But I too have to, stick to my guns and really be consistent with that. And so, recently, I have a wonderful client and we've been a little bit challenged to keep our appointments. And so this individual wants to continue to work with me. And I had the conversation with him. I said, listen, I said, thrilled to work with you. And my significant ask is that any appointment that's made, we have to be as close to 100% sure as we can be that we're going to be able to make that appointment. And if not, the fees will be levied against you. And the person was like, "Great, totally understand." And that's just a mutual respect thing. So it's not easy. I mean,
No, it's not easy
it's
because we
not
want to be
easy.
liked, we want to be nice, we
Yeah,
know that things can happen. And we set aside this time for you that we cannot
absolutely.
fill.
Absolutely.
So I know you got a flat tire
Yeah.
today. However, I have my staff here.
Yep.
I brought in a lab technician for today. We printed models, we did this, we did that, and
Hmm.
I'm sorry. you know?
Yeah.
And then when you make it a policy and when you remind people so much, it's funny how patients will call and say, I'm so sorry, charge my card. When can you
Yeah.
get me in?
Yep. Totally. Absolutely. And
That's the
I don't,
consistency, though.
yeah, and I don't want to get into this now because we talked about it before, but I'm just going to hit on this button. I'm going to push this button again, which is next holiday season when I start seeing all these posts on these dental groups. What do we do for holiday bonuses?
Mm,
I'm gonna create a standard response because like that question should not be asked because that needs to be in your policy, in your bonus compensation policy. There should not be a question. And so it in a lot of ways goes to the conversation that we're having here today, which is consistency. Because whatever you've established the year before, if it wasn't part of a formalized policy, guess what they're going to expect this year?
that's right.
That and then some. So
Yeah.
this goes to every element of your practice, from making sure lab cases go out on time to making sure you have an adequate inventory of supplies to making sure your template is filled properly to making sure that people understand and don't feel entitled to bonus compensation. Like consistency and structure is the key to leadership in any business, and dental practices are not unique.
And I would like to take it a little bit before we finish. I'd like
Yeah.
to take it and bring everybody back to before they were the boss.
Hmm.
Or even if you're not a practice owner listening to this, you're an
Yeah.
associate, let's say. But even as an associate, you're a leader, okay?
Yeah,
But let's
100%.
bring it back to like I think about when I worked at a skate shop. Okay, I
Hmm.
worked at a skateboard shop. Or when I worked at a smoothie shop.
Hmm.
Let's bring it back to where you were an employee. I hope that most dentists on here had some kind of a job before. And how crazy and difficult it is if you had an inconsistent leader. Meaning sometimes they were great. Sometimes they were, bipolar and came in on a rage. I can think of the guy who owned the skate shop where I worked. Sometimes he was just the coolest surfer bro that came in, and sometimes he came in just raging. And that is challenging not to know who you're
Hmm.
going to see. And of course, this can happen in, your spouse or your kids or your neighbors or whatever.
Yeah.
But how nice it is. Now let's think of the other way. If you've had a boss or a friend or a family member that is consistent, whether
Hmm.
they're consistently out here and they have so much energy on it, or they're consistently flat, or just that consistency and knowing what you're going to get from somebody, I think reduces stress with our team and with our patients.
Hmm. Yeah.
All of that comes from consistency.
I've got two quick stories for you. One, a couple years ago, um, not the emotional intelligence certification for the assessment I have currently, but it was a different group. And it was just, I was going to learn more about it basically. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, I want you to picture leadership like owning a dog. And you have this dog, and the dog's really, really nice. And then one day, the dog attempts to rip your arm off. Would you ever trust the dog again? And
Mm,
he just shut up and looked at the group. And I was like, wow, that's so powerful, right? And
that's so
people don't forget really, truly poor, inconsistent leadership. The second story I want to share with you is when I was 16, I worked at McDonald's. I was a cashier. The manager, who I have no idea how old he is, when you're a teenager, everybody's old.
everybody looks ancient. Yeah.
Everybody, yeah, yeah,
He was
yeah.
probably like
And
31.
so he's like, heads up, we're getting a bus coming in. So what do we do when we get a bus coming in? We make sure that we have adequate food, right? So I put more fries in the fry later. Oh, because if I remember right, it was like we have a bus coming in 20 minutes or 10
Mm,
minutes.
hmm
And then he looks at me and he yells at me for putting all those fries. I'm like, getting more fries in the fry later. I'm like, you just told me we're getting a bus
mm.
coming in. Well, they're not coming. Okay, how is that my fault? And so Think about that as a small example. It's just bizarre,
Yeah.
you
I,
know?
it all goes back to this topic of today, which is consistency.
Bingo.
It's easier to be a consistent leader. It's easier to have a consistent leader lead you. And people don't want to be led by someone who is inconsistent because you never know what you're going to get. And I would argue that they will test the limits more
Oh
when
yeah.
there's inconsistency.
Oh
You
yeah.
see this with kids, you see this with dogs, you see this
Oh
with,
yeah.
with patients or team members. So
Yeah.
let's summarize what we talked about today.
I would say that, assertive is not aggressive.
I like that.
And I'll go back to the example that I shared in the beginning of this time here today. When you're at that fork in the road and someone didn't do something and you find yourself thinking, well, I want to be liked or I don't want to cause drama. I don't want them to think I'm a jerk. Just go back to the example of yourself in childhood where your parent told you not to do something and you did it and they called you on it. Were they a jerk?
Mm,
The answer is a resounding no. So if you've set a policy or a request for action and there's a reason for it and it's violated, well, go back to step one and reestablish that this is the expectation because the more you let that stuff go that you establish for a reason, as you just said, the more likely it is that certain people will take advantage of that.
yeah, and from the people pleaser standpoint, which I definitely was, and I definitely still am, but to a lesser degree.
Sure.
Um, I would also argue, and I've learned this myself, you can still be very much liked and respected, even though you set boundaries and are consistent with them.
Oh,
And,
heck
and
yes.
maybe even more.
I'll tell you, um, I've talked about my boss, Suraj Mohandas, before on this podcast. I'd like to mention, Jeff Rowe's name. Jeff Rowe helped build LVI and then he helped build Spear. And all of us would have walked on hot coals for that man
Mm,
because he would hold you to your word, but he was consistent, he was respectful. And if he had to
mm,
change course and ask you to do A instead of B, he would tell you why.
hmm
He always had our backs. And anybody who ever worked for Jeff would tell you what just a brilliant human being he was. And it was because of consistency and leadership. It was because of empathy. It was because of communication. And it was
Yeah.
because of transparency. And
hmm
yeah, there were occasions where he'd look at us and go, listen, I can't tell you why, but we're going to have to do it this way. And you know what we all did? We looked at him and go, okay.
You did
And
it
we
that
went and
way.
did it.
Yeah.
He was a consummate leader. Love
And
Jeff.
I would just finish with this. I mean, we hear a lot that it's challenging to find and maintain employees now, right?
Hmm.
And think about everything Martin and I have talked about today. Never did we say your preps had to get better, your implants had to have less bone loss,
Yeah.
your smile design had to be better, your lab technician had to be better. You can gain skills. I mean, a lot of people listening are going to say, my biggest stress is my team, or it's
Yeah.
losing team members, or it's
Yeah.
finding new team members. This is a skill that you put your time and money and effort into, you
Yeah.
get better at, you become a better leader. Guess what? A lot of your stress from your team goes away.
Totally.
Just keep that in mind.
Totally. Totally.
I think this is a good topic.
It
This is
was.
a topic that we all need to be reminded about. I think what we brought today, people know. But they need to be reminded of it. Like even we need to be consistent
Yeah.
in the, it's like very
Yeah.
meta what I'm saying, right? We need to be consistent in this reminders of being
Hmm.
consistent
Yeah.
because we need that. We all need that reminder. Even Martin and I need these reminders.
Oh, yeah.
And this will help you in your practice be a better leader. And
Mhm.
if you want to learn some of the things that we've talked about in today's episode, like crucial conversations, setting boundaries, expectations, working on communication, managing team, managing patients, working and talking to patients about complications. We go over all of this in our Light Side Live course. It's a 2-day, 12 CE transformational workshop. It's a fairly small group. You work directly with Martin and I, and we get to have a yacht party on the first night. It's like a
Yep.
120-foot yacht with the most amazing sushi and hors d'oeuvres and whatever kind of drink you want,
Yep.
margaritas or wine or water or whatever you want. Super fun. So it's in Irvine, California on May 9th and 10th. Go to wellnessanddentistry.com, click on our links, and I think it's the top link. So
Mhm.
sign up today. We'd love to see you, and we will see you on the next episode of Wellness and Dentistry.
Take care.